Our next video comes from a former senator from Pennsylvania and answers the question, what would Rick Santorum's presidency do to bring opportunity for all and favoritism to none?
I grew up in western Pennsylvania in a steel town. I saw how that steel town and the businesses supporting it were shuttered during the 1970s because of poor leadership in business, labor, and yes, in government. Today, things should be better. With technology and lower oil prices, we should be booming, and American workers should be doing well, but they're not. And the reason they're not this time is primarily government. You see, on the left, you have Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and they want to increase the size of government, make it harder for businesses to do well here, and then flood our country with both legal and illegal immigrants to hold down wages for working Americans. On the other side, you have folks who are more interested in helping businesses be profitable than helping workers provide for their family. We need somebody who is going to work for you, the American worker. And that's why I'm running for president. I've introduced a 2020 Perfect Vision for America plan. It's a 20% tax on individual income, a 20% tax on corporate income and dividends and capital gains. In other words, everybody pays 20%. No special tax breaks, no lobbyist provisions that are in there to make the wealthy pay less. Everybody gets treated fairly and the same. And everybody gets a fair shot at rising in America. And when you pair that with a repeal of every job-crushing regulation that Barack Obama has put in place, including a repeal of Obamacare and all of the environmental regulations that have stifled this manufacturing economy, we're going to put America back to work. And we won't bring in waves of legal and illegal immigrants to compete against hardworking Americans. Someone has to step forward and be for you. Earlier this year, I announced for president from a factory floor in western Pennsylvania. I did it because I wanted to make a point. You elect me, I will make America the #1 manufacturing country in the world again. I'll put Americans back to work, and those jobs will be better paying jobs that will support you and your family. With your help, we can take back America.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Senator Rick Santorum.
Thanks for being here. Senator Santorum, thanks for being here. Your first question comes from Heather.
Hello, Heather.
Senator, you've argued that Washington Republicans care too much about the bottom lines of the donor class and not enough about the needs of working families. What exactly is blue-collar conservatism, and how can it compete with the agenda of the donor class in Washington?
Yeah, in fact, Peggy Newton actually talked about that today in an article in the Wall Street Journal, how the Republican Party sort of sold its soul 35 years ago after Reagan, or 25 years ago after Reagan, and started saddling up with the folks in Washington, D.C., and forgetting that the Republican Party is the party of working men and women, people who want to be able to rise in society. It's not the party of the fat cats. If it ever was, it certainly isn't today. 90% of workers in America don't own their own business. They aren't running big corporations. They're hardworking people who want to get out there and make a difference for themselves and their families. They love America just like you love America, and they're looking for a party that lays out a vision. I always say, you know what people's favorite word is? I think I know what everybody in this room's favorite word is. You know what it is? It's your name. And unfortunately, for the last 20 plus years, we have been painting a picture of America, of what we want to do to make things happen, and we aren't including the names of most of America. We talk about cutting taxes. I'm for, I just mentioned, a 20% flat tax. That's cutting taxes, ladies and gentlemen. A 20% flat tax with no corporate giveaways in that flat tax proposal. But that's not enough. I wrote in my book, Blue Collar Conservative, that a rising tide lifts all boats. But in America today, we have millions and millions of people with holes in their boats. And so when that tide goes up, if we're not talking about how we're going to put them to work, if we're not talking about how we're going to create opportunities for working Americans, if we're not talking about stopping a wave of legal and illegal immigrants who are undermining the ability for people to get good paying jobs, then we're not talking to working men and women in this country. There's a reason for the anger. Wages have flatlined over the last 25 years. Less than a nickel an hour per year, wages have gone up. And what have we done? We brought in waves of immigrants. 35 million over the last 20 years. 35 million immigrants over more than any 20-year period in the history of our country. And what's happened? Yes, they've suppressed wages, and since the year 2000, there have been 5.7 million net new jobs created between 2000 and 2014. And guess what? What percentage of those net new jobs are held by people who were not born in this country? The answer, all of them. All of them have been held by people who weren't born here. Are we going to be the party of the corporate interests that say, open up those borders to keep our wages down so we can keep our profits up? Are we going to be the party like the Democrats that say, bring those people in because they're going to vote for us? We don't really care what they do to working men and women. Are we going to be the party that says, we're for you, the American worker?
Senator Santorum, in the past you've supported steel tariffs. You've also supported Davis-Bacon prevailing wage laws, which in some cities cause unionized workers to use at over 50% the market rate for labor. What would you say to critics that say this is just government playing favorites in the economy?
Well, I know there's a lot of things that I look at. I mean, as I mentioned the other day about both minimum wage, I look at the XM Bank. I know that's a very popular issue with the Heritage Foundation, and I'm on the other side. I'm on the other side because I believe we want to make America the #1 manufacturing country in the world. We just saw, anybody for that? Anybody for making America the #1 manufacturer? I know your governor is, because your governor has laser beam focus on creating manufacturing jobs in this state. And guess what? We just lost some here in South Carolina and in Texas because GE just moved 500 jobs because they didn't have XM financing for a project that was going to be partly sourced here in South Carolina. Now, I will tell you, GE isn't going to lose any money. You can say, well, it was corporate welfare, the XM Bank's corporate welfare. GE is not going to lose a penny. GE is going to make the same amount of money making their product in China, Hungary, and France. You know who's going to lose money? American workers. We're going to be the only country in the world that exports any amount of product that is not going to have an ability to help our manufacturers compete financially. Now, you can say it's big government, you can say whatever you want to say. I say it's tying American workers' hands behind their back. American workers can compete with anybody. It just needs government to either get out of the way or lend a helping hand, and that's what I'm for.
Senator Santorum, our next question comes from Twitter, and it has to do with the border and the threat of radical Islamic terrorism. The question is, what is your plan for protecting all U.S. borders from threats of radicals and terrorists such as ISIS? And maybe as part of this answer, could you talk about the humanitarian crisis that's currently going on in Europe?
The border in America is unsafe, not just because we're bringing people across this country that are, as I mentioned before, that are competing with American workers. You know, I think an immigration policy, how about this for an idea? I think an immigration policy should be focused on not what are we going to do with the illegal immigrants and how are we going to get rid of them and how are we going to deal with this problem, but the immigration solution and system should be focused on how do we help America and American workers. What do you think about that? Well, we start with the border, because not only do we have people coming across who are working, we also have people coming across who are committing crimes and are running drugs and human trafficking and a whole host of other things. I introduced a border security bill 10 years ago that said we needed to build fences, walls. Now, I can build good walls too, by the way. Just like the other guy said, I can build a good wall too. And we'll build good walls and good fences. We'll put border security in place. We'll put technology in place. We will secure the border. But ladies and gentlemen, half the people who are here illegally are here because they overstayed their visa. They came into this country legally, and they didn't go home like they promised. We know every one of those names. We just have a policy in this country. The policy is we aren't going to ask you to leave anymore. We're going to let you stay. Half the people, roughly. We can identify them and ask them to leave and, in fact, enforce the laws. This is simply a matter of having a president who's willing to enforce the law and not opening up our borders to people who could potentially be harmful. Do you know since 9/11, the number of people coming to this country legally from countries that have very bad records of terrorism, particularly Muslim terrorism, since 9/11, the rate of immigrants from those countries has doubled. You would think after 9/11, maybe we'd be a little circumspect about bringing people in from potentially terrorist countries. But no, it's doubled. Do you know what the Syrian refugee, which Mike just asked me about? Do you realize that the Obama administration has brought Syrians over here in the past? In fact, do you know that 70% of all refugees that have been resettled by the United Nations have been resettled where? The United States of America. And the president's out there trying to make us feel bad that we need to take more. Ladies and gentlemen, America is a great and generous country. But what this president has done with Syrian refugees, do you realize the last group, about 7,000? Do you realize all of them were Muslims? Every single one. Now, I have nothing against bringing Muslims into this country, but why from Syria did we bring in no Christians who are being persecuted more than Muslims are in Syria?
Senator, you've been a critic of...
And I would just say one other thing. If the president wants to bring 10,000 in, then I would just say to the president, you tell us who those 10,000 are. You tell us what the breakdown is of religions. There's a lot of religions that are being persecuted in Syria, and they should have a home here in the United States just like everybody else that they want to bring over.
Senator, you've been a critic of President Obama's education policies, in particular dealing with college tuition. Do you have specific plans that would drive down the cost of college and technical training?
You know, this is one of the, this is personal. We have 7 kids. I have two of my kids. One who's not here. He had parade at the Citadel and couldn't quite make it in time for me to be here. But I have 2 boys at the Citadel who are very proud Citadel dad. But this is personal. I pay out-of-state tuition at the Citadel. Okay? That's a lot of money, just for your information. So I am subsidizing big time. And look, college education is, here's what I know. There are 2 areas of the economy that have grown faster than the rate of inflation over the last 30 or 40 years. Anybody know what they are? Education and higher education and healthcare. What do they have in common? The government. The government heavily subsidizes, so we have no incentive on the part of higher education or the medical community to save money. And so the answer is not pumping more money into the system. I have, like I said, 7 children. I'm encouraging them. Spend a couple years at community college, right? Help dad out a little bit here, right? Spend some time, maybe just working a little bit before you go to college and decide what you want to do. I think the only way that we're going to solve this problem, I mean, you can talk about, we can try to constrain the student loan program. I'll tell you one thing I would do. The student loan program under the Clinton administration was shifted over, and then eventually by Obama completely shifted over to a government-run program. I would put it back in the private sector, get the government out of this business, and have private sector oversight over these loans. And the second thing I would do, look, one of the most powerful tools a president has is the bully pulpit. And encouraging people to be as cautious in spending their money on education as they are on everything else. We have kids now today coming out with $50, $100, some cases $200,000 in loans with no ability to pay them back. They're talking about the next bubble being the student loan bubble. Part of that is because we have the bully pulpit, the president encourage everybody should go to college. And here we're going to make more money available. It's not the right thing for a lot of kids, and we need to give them some leadership and some guidance about, like I'm telling my kids, take some time off, go to community college. You can go to a 4-year school later. That's the kind of common sense leadership that this country needs.
Senator Santorum, you've been a vocal critic of the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing policies, which have the impact of reducing the impact of an American paycheck. Yet in recent years, one of the biggest burdens on the American family has been the cost of food. And policies that you've supported, like the renewable fuel standard, actually have the impact of increasing the price of food. How do you reconcile these two positions?
Yeah, I would say that I have been critical of the Fed, and I have been critical of quantitative easing, and because what quantitative easing does is basically give government a blank check to continue to spend, continue to borrow, because there's basically no cost associated with borrowing. If we were paying standard interest rates right now, we'd be bankrupt. I mean, we'd be even more bankrupt than we are today. We couldn't afford our interest payments. So yes, I've been very critical of the Fed because I think that's an irresponsible policy. I would argue with you that the RFS, which is the Renewable Fuel Standards, has done what you suggested. I mean, corn prices right now are about $3.70 a bushel. If you campaign in Iowa, you know what the price of corn is. And that's not driving food prices up. There was a period of time when there was a transition, but here's what I tell you what's done, is it's taken an agricultural economy that was heavily dependent on subsidies. Agriculture, whether it was corn or soybeans or cotton or wheat, a whole host of other crops, which were dependent upon government subsidies. Now those subsidies are gone. And by the way, I was on the Ag Committee, and I fought and personally eliminated a couple of them, like the peanut program, which I was out to abolish. Why? Because the government shouldn't be out there trying to push a cheap food policy and keeping farm prices low by subsidies. So we got rid of subsidies. We put in place a policy that allows market access for a fuel that the oil companies don't want to use. And what's happened? Agriculture has had the best years. We haven't spent a penny on federal subsidies, and the agricultural economy has grown. And now, once the farmers got things in sync, they're actually producing for the right amount for all the different needs of all the different products, and food prices at the farm level have actually settled down back to almost where they were before. So I think it's actually been a successful policy, and I think it will be a strong policy going forward.
Now pleased to welcome back to the stage Governor Nikki Haley.
Hello, Governor.
Welcome back to South Carolina. I keep telling
the number one manufacturing governor in America right here. She's doing a great job. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. And I keep telling Senator Santorum if he's got 2 kids at the Citadel, he just needs to move here. So I'm still going to wait until you move to South Carolina.
I've got a brother who lives here.
Well, there you go.
I've got a niece at Carolina, so I'm pretty invested here in the state of South Carolina.
We're going to get him here yet.
And my son's girlfriend, who's actually here, went to Clemson. So there you
go Tigers!
How about that? I'm covered.
So I want to ask you this question because I think this has been this long-going conversation that we've had for a long time. You were actually a champion many years ago for Social Security reform for President Bush.
With Jim DeMint.
And the problem is, if you look back then, we had a Republican House and a Republican Senate. What happened, and what do we do to stop having these conversations when it's our own majorities that are not helping us get it through?
That's a great conversation, and I want to give a shout out. I want to give a shout out to Jim DeMint, because Jim and I, we had actually the first time I recall, and I don't know if they had one since, we actually had structured formal debates on the floor of the United States Senate in 2005, once President Bush called for a reform of the Social Security system. Jim and I were the 2 Republicans. It was Dick Durbin and Ron Wyden were the 2 Democrats, and we went out and had a formal debates about how to reform the Social Security system. So you had a great leader, and he's still, obviously, if he's here, Jim's here, you still have a great leader in Washington with Jim DeMint. But you're right, Nikki, the president went out there and said we need to reform Social Security, but didn't really follow up with much of a plan. And Jim and I went out there and we put our ideas out on the table, and it didn't go very far. Here's the problem, Governor. The problem with Social Security is it's simple. It's a simple problem. We have revenues here and we have expenditures going here. And the revenues are all Social Security taxes, and the expenses are all benefits that go to seniors primarily, and some for people with disabilities. And if you have to bring these two lines together. If not, within about 10 years, we're only going to pay about 77 cents on the dollar. That's all the money that'll be coming in to pay. And so we've got to bring these two lines together. Let me ask, there's a good crowd here. It's a good cross-section of America. How many people are for raising Social Security taxes? Raise your hand. Right, okay. How many people are for cutting Social Security benefits? Raise your hand. Okay. Now this is a pretty conservative crowd. I don't see a whole lot of hands. So here's the problem. Nobody wants to do either of these things to bring them together. That's the problem. And it's a simple problem because you got to do one or the other. And people are going to feel it one way or the other. That's why I always think, I give Jim a lot of credit, and frankly, for me to be able to step out there and put some solutions. Let me just real quickly give you one.
Got time, go ahead.
Okay, one solution. When Social Security was put in place in 1936, what was life expectancy? 61. And they set the eligibility age at 65. Today, life expectancy is 78, and I'm told the actuaries are actually changing the tables because they've done a recalibration. It's going to go up about 2 years, they're telling me. It's going to go up to about 80 life expectancy because they've actually recalculated how long people are living. So, and what's the eligibility age? 66. In fact, when you hit 66, life expectancy, for any of you who just turned 66, is another 20 years. Social Security wasn't built for that. And so what do we do? Well, what I've suggested is that we adjust the eligibility age and have it track with life expectancy. So as life expectancy goes up, which normally is about 1 month every 2 years, then the eligibility age will go up. What does that do? That means that every generation of future seniors will have the same time on Social Security as the previous generation. That will solve. Anybody ever? You like that idea? What do you think? I mean, that's one starter. And now the other second thing is, and others have talked about this, is we have a lot of wealthy seniors, and I'm talking about really wealthy seniors who, should not get a full Social Security benefit. That can take a little less in Social Security and help everybody else who's paying the taxes right now. Those would be the two things that I would talk about.
A lot of, when you run for president, you have to deal with a lot of controversial issues. One thing, again, that you've been consistent on is you've fought against the Iranian regime for a very long time.
Yes, ma'am, I have.
Looking at where we are now, again, majority Republican House, Republican Senate, what do you think the first thing is that you do under President Santorum?
Governor Haley's right. Those sanctions that were put on Iran, I was the author of those sanctions back in 2004, 5, and 6, and we, thank you. We got a pretty good track record of doing bipartisan things that are conservative. My only failing was I wish we'd have gotten tougher sanctions, but I had to compromise. But it was a good compromise because we did put sanctions in. They weren't as tough as I wanted, but we did put sanctions in. See, that's the difference between a good compromise and a bad compromise. A good compromise is doing less of a good thing. A bad compromise is doing less of a bad thing. We only want to do less of good things, no more less of bad things in Washington, D.C. And so when it comes to Iran, we should not be compromising at all. This is a regime that practices a form of Islam that's called apocalyptic Islam. They are convinced and committed to the belief that the end of the world is coming soon, and they have a role to play in that. They believe that they can hasten the return of their Redeemer, their Savior, in radical Shia Islam. It's new. It's a new version of Islam. It's a twisted version that the Ayatollah Khomeini came up with. And they are committed to bringing about this return of the 12th Imam. Now, many of you have probably never heard this before. That's because your leaders aren't telling you the truth about the nature of the enemy we face. I've been studying and working on the issue of stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon for a dozen years. The Iranians know who I am, and I know who they are. In 1980, the Soviet Union, and Iran for that matter, knew there was a new sheriff in town, and immediately behavior started to change. Why? Because they knew who Ronald Reagan was, and Ronald Reagan knew who they were. You want to change things in the world community? You elect someone with experience, who has a track record, who has fought, who has, and will say on day one, Iran, you either open up all of these nuclear facilities for inspection by the United States of America and anyone else we choose to inspect, or else, and the else means not just a snapback of sanctions, but I have no doubt they will have violated this agreement. They will be in very close to a nuclear weapon. And so what I have said, and I will say it clearly to the Iranians, we will take out these facilities unless you allow us to inspect them and you begin the dismantling of those facilities.
Ladies and gentlemen, help me thank our honorary